The Broncos would perhaps have you believe that it's not clear at the quarterback position who's going to be QB1, whether the idea is Bo Nix, who was just drafted 12th, spoiler alert, it's him, or whether it's holdover Jared Stidham, who was paid a lot of money by Sean Payton because he thought he was a future NFL starter, or the newly acquired Zach Wilson, who was really nothing but a flyer and an opportunity for Payton to see how much of a quarterback whisperer he really is. Nix is going to be the starting quarterback for the Broncos, assuming he's healthy, on week 1 and hopefully for years to come. We know that. What we don't know is not only who he's going to throw to, but who's his primary target going to be. One, Courtland Sutton isn't available. He's not at camp. He wants a new deal.
I'll make a bargain, and I won't include Sean in this part of the bargain.
Me or Peyton?
I promise to stop talking every single day about how inept the Rockies are offensively, particularly on a pace to maybe set a record for most times striking out, although they have some challengers in that category for 2024. I promise to do that in exchange for our print and digital friends. I'm begging them now. Stop talking about quarterback competition.
Oh,
stop it. As Troy Renk pointed out in the Denver Post today in a fine column, since Bo Nix was drafted, he has spoken with, at various times, John Elway, Peyton Manning. Oh, and by the way, he's hung out with Tom Brady and Jay-Z. Bo Nix is becoming famous. That's Troy's lead today. Jarrett Stidham is not becoming famous. Zach Wilson is becoming infamous for incompetence. There is no doubt
up here in Colorado,
that
just
throughout the preseason, you'll see plenty of Bo Nix. Not all the time, because he's the starting quarterback and they don't want him to get hurt. You will see Bo Nix in week 1. I promise you, barring injury, you will see Bo Nix at quarterback in week 1. You don't talk about him in the way that Sean Payton has, and I'm going to quote now. He said, Payton, watching Nix is almost like watching a good golfer. He added to that in terms of repeatable swings. You get the idea. Also praising how the former Oregon quarterback plays with patience and operates efficiently in the pocket. That's the holy grail for Sean
Payton.
Patience and operating within the pocket with poise. That's Drew Brees.
Right.
That's the gold standard. And this guy's going to ride the bench watching Jarrett Stidham and or Zach Wilson. Really now.
You went out of your way to pick him number 12 overall. The funny thing is he's such a Sean Payton type of prospect that it was the worst kept secret in the entire NFL that the Denver Broncos would pick Bo Nix 12. And if they had to move up a spot or two to do it, they probably would. And other teams didn't value Bo Nix that way. And so I will give the Broncos credit for not overreacting, because they realized no one else was going to pick Nix earlier than 12, and they could just sit and wait and let him land in his lap. Even if Michael Penix goes higher in a shock to Atlanta, they could stay calm because nobody else had Nix graded the way the Broncos did.
They were a little worried for a few minutes when Penix was drafted.
Maybe a little bit, but not enough to move. And it turned out that they got their guy.
The Vikings ended up being the ones to move
to
draft a quarterback that the Broncos never wanted.
And when we told you that long before the draft, even when the smoke screen was going up, Bo Nix was always the Broncos guy. They got him, and that's all the more reason to believe he's going to be the starter. The question now, Courtland Sutton is holding out for a new contract. Mandatory minicamp starts June 11th, mandatory being the key word. Don't expect Courtland Sutton to be anywhere near Dove Valley until June 11th. Just a guess today, Sandy, do you think he'll be there on the 11th? Or do you think all of a sudden we have a real story on our hands?
The Broncos consistently say, and this is George Payton saying this, not Sean Payton, that vis-a-vis Courtland Sutton, he is in a good place, and therefore the Broncos aren't concerned. it seems clear that Courtland Sutton wants a new contract, and equally clear that the Broncos have no intention of giving him a new contract. He's got $27 million left on his deal, but only $2 million of those dollars are guaranteed.
Right. And as we know, the NFL guarantees the only thing you pay attention to.
We have reached an impasse here between the Broncos and Courtland Sutton. My point about the Bronco quarterback situation, believe it or not, being less uncertain than their wide receiving situation, certainly their tight end situation, is that they know who their number one quarterback is going to be. They have no idea. Courtland Sutton should be their number one wide receiver, but they have no idea whether Courtland Sutton will be starting the season as a Denver Bronco. So they don't really have a number one receiver at this point. They certainly don't have a number one tight end unless you count the oft-injured Greg Dulcich, who's had right hamstring problems since he came out of the womb, apparently.
Well, I feel you.
I think he strained his hamstring coming out.
Well, I can't pick on him for that. I probably strained it today myself just sitting into this chair. But you're right. The situation there.
You're not a world-class athlete.
Obviously, yeah. I'm not proud of it. It's not like I think it's great. Don't get me wrong. But I could just relate. That's all. I mean, everything pulls. I get it. You reach a point and everything falls apart.
I've got a sore back that stiffens up from time to time. But I'm 66 years old.
What's league minimum? Can I pull a hamstring and still get league minimum?
He's barely a third my age.
Well, sometimes,
and he keeps pulling that, what is it, the right hamstring?
Yep,
I think
sometimes it happens. It's the way it goes. But in Sutton's case, it's interesting. You do know he does want a new contract, and it's by what he's not saying. The reports in the media have been consistent. He wants a new contract. National media members, local media members
wants more guaranteed money.
It. And not once Courtland Sutton has popped on his social media or anything and said, "Oh, that's not true. I'm just working out with my friends in Florida because I'm working out."
However, he has gone on social media to bemoan the departures of the Wilsons and Justin Simmons of the world.
He has indeed. And of course, we don't know where Justin Simmons lands, but we do know where Russell Wilson is. And that team, by the way, could use another wide receiver, especially one that caught 10 touchdowns from that same quarterback last year.
And who is close friends with their presumed starting quarterback.
So this is one of the challenges. But you look at the next candidates up. I mean, you start with Josh Reynolds, who's the most accomplished. They signed him in free agency away from Detroit, of which he had a great year. Of course, everybody apparently had a great year when Jared Goff has been throwing to him for the last couple. And Josh Reynolds has had kind of trouble jumping to that next level. He was good when he was young with the Rams and Matt Stafford throwing there. He was good with the Lions and Goff, not great.
But maybe he's on a lower tier from Sutton in the sense that he catches 50 passes a year for 650 to 700 yards.
I think that's the target.
Mixes in maybe 3, 4, 5 touchdowns. That's fine, but that's not your number one receiver.
Right.
So they have a bunch of 2s and 3s at the wide receiver
position. Next guys that
are
probably the most promising, that have the most the easiest path to a starting time, are rookies and a second-year guy. Troy Franklin, we talked about him a little bit yesterday. If you missed any one of the programs, you can find it on the Mile High Sports app or on our YouTube channel as well, Mile High Sports. But Troy Franklin drafted out of the 4th round from Oregon, where he was Bo Nix's top target. There's a lot of synergy there, although they did most of their work, speaking again of Sean Payton's gold standard, in the middle of the field. Franklin and Nix were very effective in the middle of the field. That may indicate that perhaps you may use him in the slot, but of course, if Sutton isn't there, you've got to use him on the outside. Franklin is going to have an opportunity to play anyway. He's certainly in line to be the wide receiver number 3, even if Sutton plays, because of his ability, by a lot of people graded to be probably higher than where he was selected in the 4th. Certainly his rapport with Nix, a lot to like. But putting Franklin, let's say you don't get things worked out with Sutton, Reynolds being the 1, Franklin being the 2, now you're asking both of these guys to do something that's probably maybe a little bit ahead of where their development is.
Maybe a lot ahead of where their development is.
And that ends up hurting Bo Nix.
It could. And I think that their wide receivers as a group need Nix more than he needs them. I think there is a floor with Nix that is a little bit higher than Bronco quarterbacking floors have been over the last 8 years.
Yeah.
I think his floor is a little higher.
I do too.
But if you want him to become one of the 10, 15 best quarterbacks in the NFL, you're going to need a lot more from your wide receiving group than they appear to have at the moment. I think it is fair to say if you're dividing wide receiver groups into thirds, that the Broncos have a lower third group.
Certainly,
although in recent years, they've been at times the highest paid group of wide receivers
overvalued
in the NFL.
I think dramatically.
Completely overvalued. And a lot of that had to do with Payton's decision to give Tim Patrick, whose injuries
That's George
aren't
Payton's decision.
Payton's fault.
Right.
Obviously, George Payton's. But also Cortland Sutton, long-term contracts.
Although this deal with Sutton looks as it's a little more team-friendly at this point. That's one of the
Now,
reasons the
because
Broncos
there's
don't
no
have any desire
guaranteed
to mess
money
with
on the
it.
back end of it.
For the record, last year, Cortland Sutton had 59 catches for 772 yards and 10 touchdowns. Jerry Jeudy was the number 2 receiver, 54 catches, only 5 fewer than Sutton. 758 yards, only 14 fewer than Cortland Sutton, but 2 touchdowns. That's the concern. But Jeudy has moved on. When you go look at Reynolds playing with, at least conceptually, if you were to try to put ourselves in the mind of Sean Payton for a moment, a quarterback he'd prefer to have Jared Goff over Russell Wilson. Josh Reynolds finished with 40 catches for 608 yards and 5 touchdowns. Now, maybe he could do that again, but that was good for the third spot because Sam Laporta was so good at tight end. When you go to the last guy in that puzzle, though, the Broncos' next best receiver was Samaje Perine with 455, and then Marvin Mims Jr. with 377. Mims will be in his second year at being picked second round out of Oklahoma. But he feels more like the kind of player that you're going to have to use situationally. If, again, they don't get things done with Sutton, you probably have to turn him into a slot receiver and hope for the best, right?
I guess. Don't you think the hope, and I understand that he hasn't played in 2 years. Don't you hope that Patrick becomes your slot receiver?
You can't tell because I'm behind a desk, but I'm not a large man. Marvin Mims is 1 inch taller and about 10 pounds heavier. I'm not going to last real long in the NFL, and I wouldn't have even at 22. Marvin Mims Jr. is in better shape, and he's a lot faster, so he will. But that's not a guy you want to sit there and get knocked around all the time.
Didn't it surprise you, though, that for a guy who averaged over 22 yards a catch and had, I think, 3 catches of more than 40 yards
to improve the passing offense, he couldn't get in.
When you needed to make more big plays, he couldn't get on the field.
Nope. And to me, that's still shocking. It really is.
And the excuse was, well, we've got Jerry Jeudy. Well, you traded Jerry Jeudy and got next to nothing back in return for him. So this idea that Jerry Jeudy forced them to use Mims from the line of scrimmage almost not at all.
It was fewer than a third of the snaps.
It made no sense.
Right.
It made no sense to me. And I understand that Sean Payton has a habit of profiling at certain positions, and guys either measure up or they don't. And I'm not saying he doesn't like Mims because he was in charge of the draft in which Mims was the first draft pick the Broncos took. In the Sean Payton era, Mims was the first pick the Broncos took. But I think their idea this year is that Mims will play a little more from the line of scrimmage, but because of the rules changes in the kicking game, that'll be much more valuable as a return man than he was, and much more able than he was last year when, as I recall, he was a Pro Bowl.
He was one of the few Pro Bowlers on the team. And
he was one of the Pro Bowl selections
as a returner.
One of the few. As a returner.
And Payton, with the changes to the kickoff rules, Payton's talked a lot about Mims in that role. That may be part of it, too. Of course, the Broncos have other things they need to attend to. Tomorrow, the OTAs will wrap up, and